Thankfully, there was an example of somebody who was willing to take it right up to the Treasurer, and well done to my mate Andrew Clennell. But I'll get to that in a second. But first, Jim Chalmers, just how much money will the Australian federal government, of you as the Treasurer, owe to the rest of the world?
$1 trillion, $1 trillion, $1 trillion, $1 trillion, $1 trillion.
And what did you say when you thought it was the Liberal Party who predicted that years after they were in office we would get to this number?
This is a Prime Minister with a budget with $1 trillion in debt and not enough to show for it, because it's absolutely riddled with rorts and riddled with waste and mismanagement. He's got a record of weak economic growth, stagnant wages, weak business investment, weak productivity right across the board.
As I say, Andrew Clennell, he confronted the Treasurer with $5, and that piece of footage is going to last for a very long period of time, and you could tell Jim Chalmers isn't not liking it. But good on Andrew for pointing that out, because it was, again, the central fallacy, the bribe, the BS, to distract from the real story, the $1 trillion story, the decades and decades and decades of budget deficits to come. Well, Andrew is famous for the questions that he asks at press conferences. And there was a big one today with the Treasurer inside the Great Hall of Parliament House.
A budget that delivers generational debt without the generational dividend. $1 trillion in debt and growing, deficits as far as the eye can see, but barely anything else designed to survive beyond the election. And that's the biggest risk in this budget. Instead of laying out an economic vision, the government focuses on managing political perception. Both of those were said by Jim Chalmers in May 2021. You've just delivered a budget which forecasts a decade of deficits. $1 trillion debt, the next 4 deficits of $179 billion. My question, Treasurer, is do you feel like a hypocrite today?
Middle stump, off to the pavilion, no review. Now, you would think that somebody would be mildly chastened by their own words being repeated right back to them. But of course, Jim Chalmers, well, this was his answer to the question.
No, of course not, because central to the budget last night was an economic vision for the long term. Building Australia's future was a key element of the budget.
I repeat, the middle stump is still spinning behind the wicket, making its way towards the fence. That's how out and bowled out he was by that question. But, oh, we just practice the pivot, right? And that might be charming when it comes to Donald Trump, but it is disgraceful when it comes to this bloke, because he paraded as something else. They paraded at the last election as the people who would do something about cost of living. Instead, cost of living went through the roof. In their first budget, they took $1,500 off 10 million workers with a low to middle income tax offset, a guaranteed $1,500 tax return for 10 million workers, only to say, well, $25 a month when it comes to your power bill, $5 when it comes to a tax return in a year's time, or the ones that they want to add them to, like last year, were $12 a week for people earning $40,000. They spend more money on government advertising about the politics of what they are doing rather than spending it on things like making sure that we can feed the more than 3.7 million households, and that's just not people, households that don't know where the food's going to come from for the rest of the week. There was nothing in the budget to discuss anything about the almost 3 million people that are this close to homelessness. And small business, well, it got bashed around the head. One of the very few things that small business has been able to rely upon over the past few years is a thing called the instant asset write-off, meaning that if you buy something for your business, you can write it off against your tax. At the height of the pandemic, you were able to do this to up to $100,000. It meant that people were able to buy a car, claim it off their tax, and if all you do is drive around in your ute, that's really important. It then went back to $20,000, and under this budget, there is no reference to it going forward into the future. And just on that $1 trillion figure that Jim Chalmers now has to wear around his neck, not as like a gold medal, like the bloke he used to work for, Wayne Swan, is the world's greatest treasurer, but the bloke who took us into the $1 trillion black hole. Even when he was confronted with his own words, even after he did the pivot, he still found a way to blame the Liberals.
Their budget was weighed down by waste and rorts and missed opportunities, and what we've done is we've invested in the future of this country, building more homes, investing in lifelong learning, strengthening Medicare, and these are legacy items that we will leave behind whenever we finish up